To Kill a Mockingbird Chapter 1. The story is narrated by a young girl named Jean Louise Finch, who is almost always called by her nickname Scout. She is 8 years old. We know this from page 1 when the narrator states that Jim, her older brother, is nearly 13. And then just a little bit later on that same page, she says that Jim is 4 years her senior, which would make her 8. Scout starts to explain the circumstances that led to the broken arm that her older brother Jim sustained many years earlier. She begins by recounting her family history. One important thing to know about the story is that this story is told entirely as a flashback. Scout is now an older, more mature woman, and she looks back on her time as a child. She does reiterate some childlike qualities and really gets back to her old self, but she is looking back. The first of her ancestors to come to America was a fur trader and apothecary named Simon Finch, who fled England to escape religious persecution and established a successful farm on the banks of the Alabama River. The farm, called Finch's Landing, supported the family for many years. The first Finches to make a living away from the farm were Scout's father, Atticus Finch, who became a lawyer in the nearby town of Macomb, and his brother Jack Finch, who went to medical school in Boston. Their sister, Alexandra Finch, stayed to run the landing. A successful lawyer, Atticus makes a solid living in Macomb, a tired, poor, old town in the grips of the Great Depression. He lives with Jim and Scout on Macomb's main residential street. Their cook, an old black woman named Calpurnia, helps to raise the children and keep the house. Atticus's wife died when Scout was 2, so she does not remember her mother well. But Jim, 4 years older than Scout, has memories of their mother that sometimes make him unhappy. Now, it may be surprising to know that Atticus does have a cook named Calpurnia. She is not a slave, although this book does take place during the Great Depression in the 1930s, so there is still a lot of racism. However, Atticus is very forward-thinking in his ideas about racial progression and equilibrium. In the summer of 1933, when Jim is nearly 10 and Scout almost 6, a peculiar boy named Charles Baker Harris moves in next door. The boy, who calls himself Dill, stays for the summer with his aunt, Miss Rachel Haverford, who owns the house next to the Finches. Dill doesn't like to discuss his father's absence from his life, but he is otherwise a talkative and extremely intelligent boy who quickly becomes the Finch children's chief playmate. All summer, the three act out various stories that they have read. When they grow bored of this activity, Dill suggests that they attempt to lure Boo Radley, a mysterious neighbor, out of his house. The selection where Dill is actually introduced is on page 8. This is a really cute section as Jim and Scout approach Dill. He is in a cabbage patch, and they say to him, or he says to them, Hey yourself, said Jim pleasantly. I'm Charles Baker Harris, he said. I can read. So what? I said. I just thought you'd like to know I can read. You got anything needs reading, I can do it. How old are you? Asked Jim. 4.5? Going on 7. And that is their first interaction with Dill, who quickly becomes one of their best friends. Arthur Boo Radley lives in the rundown Radley place, and no one has seen him outside in years. Scout recounts how, as a boy, Boo got in trouble with the law, and his father imprisoned him in the house as punishment. He has not been heard from until 15 years later, when he stabbed his father with a pair of scissors. Although people suggested that Boo was crazy, old Mr. Radley refused to have his son committed to an asylum. When the old man died, Boo's brother Nathan came to live in the house with Boo. Nevertheless, Boo continued to stay inside. Now, it's also important to note that the character's real name is not Boo. Of course, this is a nickname. He is obviously mentally unstable, as it says he was making a collage and his father had asked him a question. He actually stabbed his father in the leg, but his father would not allow Boo to be taken to a mental institution because, as he says, he doesn't want to taint the name of the Radleys. He doesn't want them to be seen as a crazy person. There are a lot of rumors about Boo Radley. For example, he has gnarly teeth, white skin, he's dirty, he lurks around homes at night and eats squirrels and things that are running around the neighborhood. Of course, all of these are just rumors and speculation of small town folk. None of them are actually true. Dill is fascinated by Boo and tries to convince the Finch children to help him lure this phantom of Maycomb outside. Eventually, he dares Jim to run over and touch the house. Jim does so, sprinting back hastily. There is no sign of movement at the Radley place, although Scout thinks that she sees a shutter move slightly, as if someone were peeking out. And that's kind of where chapter 1 ends. Now, it is important to note that Dill is very curious about Boo Radley. He does want to taunt him to come out. Scout is getting ready to start school, which this may be a bit confusing because at the beginning of the book, it did establish that Scout, Jim is nearly 13, and Scout mentions that that's 4 years her senior, which would actually make her 8. But as the book goes on, she actually goes further back into time, so she is just getting ready to start school. They obviously have a very southern dialect, as can be seen by a couple of things that they say, and of course we can relate to this. As Dill says, you got anything that needs reading? So we kind of drop off the G's with that kind of dialect. And of course, anytime Calpurnia talks, we see that. There goes the meanest man ever God blew breath into, murmured Calpurnia on page 15. So that kind of talk, of course, is indicative of the southern dialect. I think that pretty well wraps up chapter 1. One thing that I would like to point out is on page 19, right at the last paragraph of chapter 1, the old house was the same, droopy and sick, but as we stared down the street, we thought we saw an inside shutter flick, a tiny, almost invisible movement, and the house was still. So just want to note that Harper Lee does a good job there of creating emotion. We already feel kind of sorry for Boo Radley, who seems to be kind of a hermit type character, doesn't get out a lot. And the house is almost like a physical representation of him as a person, same, droopy and sick, with that little flicker of light, though. So we have some questions about Boo Radley there, definitely. Is he going to be a main character towards the end of the story, or is he going to remain in the shadows? Some other important things to note about the book as we begin reading is that Harper Lee, this is her one and only well-known book. Now, she did release a sequel to Kill a Mockingbird just a few years ago. Of course, that was released under some interesting pretenses as Harper Lee developed Alzheimer's into her older age. She never actually wanted the sequel released. However, after her sister passed away, who was her caretaker, some publishers were able to talk her into releasing it. Some believe against her will because, of course, she has Alzheimer's, so she's not aware of what she's doing. But nevertheless, the book was released. There are speculation about what the book's meaning is to be. Is it a true sequel to Kill a Mockingbird? Some believe that it could be an original manuscript for To Kill a Mockingbird that her publishers did not like and then forced her to rewrite the book, which then gave us To Kill a Mockingbird. Another really important thing to note about Harper Lee is that Harper Lee also went to law school. So as one of our main characters here, Jim and Scout's father, Atticus Finch, is a lawyer, and throughout the book you'll see there are a lot of things that happen that deal with the law, what's right, what's wrong, and so Harper Lee kind of has an insider's view of this from a lawyer's perspective.